Courage starts with showing up and letting ourselves be seen. Brene Brown. I'm Heidi Moore with Wretched Productions, and you're listening to Miss Jaye, The Renovation.
Alexa, how could I be happier?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, me either. Episode 6, Drag Queen, Heal Thyself.
Just believe in you. God, I didn't have time for that. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Miss Jaye, The Renovation. I can't believe I'm only on episode 6. This is seriously turning into such a project. I really thought that this was going to be something I would work on for 3, maybe 4 months. I would just make fun of some self-help books, have a couple laughs, and it's really turned into something else entirely. And I'm gonna get into that more in a couple of episodes when we have the midway checkpoint. But I just want to be honest and tell you that I've really been struggling through some of this. I think that a lot of these books, as much as a lot of them haven't really worked for me or they haven't really jived with my own understanding of pursuing mental health goals or whatever it is, regardless of how the books fit in, there definitely are some real issues going on in my life and some things that I'm really having to grapple with. And so it's been a lot. It's been very emotional so far. And so I keep working through it and I keep trying to do the process, but it's a struggle sometimes. It's a struggle to keep pushing and pushing and pushing and to keep encountering these sort of emotional blockages. And it's like, Jesus, I thought I was better off than this. I didn't realize I was quite so in need of emotional stability or whatever. But this book is a lot of fun. So the book that I'm looking at for this episode is How to Heal Yourself When No One Else Can by Amy B. Scher. Sure? I can't be sure. Oh, I'm never too sad for a dad joke. But this book is fun because this is one that's a little bit more new agey. It's a little bit more woo-woo. And so I kind of like the perspective. It's a little bit different than what I've been encountering so far. The other books that we've looked at so far have been a little bit more of the typical sort of self-help, hug and cry and learn and grow type of books. Whereas this one is a little bit more related to energy work and spirituality. And that's something that's really important to me. First, let's talk about where this book came from. This is actually not one that I picked out. This is one that I actually got from my mom. So this is going to be the first time that we feature Mama Champagne in an episode of Miss Jaye, The Renovation. Part 1. Mama said there'd be days like this. So this interview segment was recorded back in November of 2018. My mom was visiting me for Thanksgiving, and so while she was there, I decided to record just a few quick interview segments to include in the episodes for the books that she purchased. So everything that she said is before any of the episodes were put out or released, and certainly before even I found myself with a different project than what I anticipated from the start. Now, as I was going back and listening to these interview segments, I thought it was interesting that there was a lot of silence. And even to me, they felt maybe a little bit awkward. And I think that's because I have put my mother through a lot with my sort of mental health journey. I think sometimes these episodes are a little bit difficult for my mother to listen to because she has a tendency to put guilt and blame on herself for things that are not within her control. She's very much a fixer. And so when something's wrong, she always wants to be able to fix it. And with something like mental health and depression, that's not something she can just step in and just make it okay. And I think that she's really kind of had to come to terms with that. And I think that we've had much more open, frank discussions about mental health and about how I'm feeling and about how I'm working through these issues since I started doing this podcast. So I think it might be interesting to get some of her updated perspective a little bit later on in the series. But for now, here's a short interview segment that I recorded in November of 2018, talking to my mom about How to Heal Yourself When No One Else Can by Amy B. Scher. We've just settled on Scher. So the first book that you bought was How to Heal Yourself When No One Else Can, a total self-healing approach for mind, body, and spirit. So why did you pick this book?
Well, I just picked this book because I felt like you are a kind of person who wants to do things on your own. You're not a person that really asks for a lot of help from other people. So I thought if you wanted to heal yourself, nobody else could do it. So you can heal yourself when no one else can. I just thought it sounded inspirational and interesting. Energy therapy and emotional healing techniques. I thought that was an interesting concept.
Because I'm kind of woo-woo sometimes.
Well, yeah, and so am I. So,
Yeah.
so I'm kind of woo-woo too. So I just thought that would be a different concept.
And what do you hope that I get out of this book?
Well, I just hope that you get a way to deal with depression and just feel better about life in general. I hope.
I listened to that interview segment and there's just so much in between the words that we're saying to each other. And I think that it's so indicative of what a lot of us go through. And I think that my family has never been one that talks a lot about mental health or emotional things. It's just not something we do. We always had other ways to sort of let each other know that we loved each other and all that sort of stuff. We didn't feel the need to always talk about it. And so it's not that I never felt loved or supported. I mean, I certainly feel like my family is extremely loving and supportive, but we never talked about some of these emotional issues. And I think that I was always sort of the emotional rainbow sheep of the family that always wanted to talk about everything and bring everything up. And I was very dramatic and nobody quite knew what to do with me. And I think that it's so difficult to see someone that you love struggle with something really deep and really dark and not be able to just step in and make it better. That's such an awful feeling and that's so powerful and can feel very defeating. And so I think that it's been a real point of growth in our relationship. And I think that that's part of what this whole project is about. It's not just about being brave behind a microphone. It's about trying to be brave with the people in my life that matter. Part 2, Getting Energized. Okay, so when I first saw this book, How to Heal Yourself When No One Else Can, I seriously thought that it might turn out to be like the 300-page book equivalent of a motivational poster. Like the one with the little cat hanging from a tree branch that says, "Hang in there, kitty. Only you can believe in yourself. Just believe in you." God, I didn't have time for that. But then I started looking at it more closely, and I realized that it was published by Llewellyn. So Llewellyn is one of, if not the biggest publisher of New Age spirituality titles. I've been reading books from Llewellyn for years. And as I looked more closely at the book and what it was about, I realized that it was actually about energy work. And it was something that made a lot more sense to me. Now, I have this group of what I call my woo-woo friends. And that's what we were talking about in the interview segment when I told my mom, well, yeah, I'm kind of woo-woo. And she said, yeah, I'm kind of woo-woo too. Is that I have my group of friends that I call my woo-woo friends. And the woo-woo stuff is all of that stuff that's out there. It's in that kind of spiritual realm, you know, how we think about higher powers and different sort of new agey beliefs, whether it's tarot, whether it's crystals, whether it's UFOs, whether it's celestial beings, whether it's reincarnation, all that kind of stuff that falls into that new agey soup. And I often joke that I'm sort of the least woo-woo of my woo-woo friends. I tend to be the most skeptical. I tend to be somebody who absorbs that kind of stuff with the most critical eye or the most skepticism. But there is definitely a lot of that new age sort of philosophy that makes sense to me. I've been reading tarot cards for over 2 decades, and I actually read tarot cards for clients. It's something that really sort of makes sense to me. It's something that I really connect with in terms of talking to a higher power. You know, I think that there is so much we don't understand about the energies of our bodies and the energies of things around us and people around us and how they interact and how they work. And I think that that's something that has been present in all civilizations, in all societies throughout history, an awareness of this sort of other kind of energetic interaction between people and places and things. And in some ways, I think science is just starting to catch up now. And we know that, you know, atoms are always spinning, they're always generating an energetic field. And so just because we don't understand what those energies mean or how they work doesn't mean that they're not doing something. You know, ancient Greeks created Zeus to explain why there was lightning in the sky. Now, of course, science figured out what lightning is. It's electricity and it's going from one location to another. But just because the ancient Greeks didn't understand what lightning was, didn't make it any less real. It was still part of their lives. They just found a different way to explain it. And I think that that's part of what we're experiencing with a lot of this spiritual stuff, is that we see evidence of it, we experience it, but we don't necessarily have the language, or we don't have the sort of logical scientific words to pin it down the way that a lot of people would like to. But it doesn't make it any less real. And so when I realized that this book was much more in that vein, it was much more in the vein of working with your energetic bodies and working with harnessing the energy around you for healing and for wholeness, I was actually really kind of excited to get into this and see what it had to offer. Part 3. Here's the rub. All right, so this book includes a lot of different energy work techniques. It's a lot of different things that you can do to ground yourself, to clear out your chakras, to work with your energetic bodies, to help get rid of negative experiences and negative things that are sort of stuck in your energetic system. And that's part of what I really like about this book, is that it's something to do. It's not just a thinking cure. It's something where you can actually go in and take actions. And I'm not going to go into a lot of the techniques. I think that's something that you can buy the book and you can read it. I think it's better served by having the book and working through it and being able to read a little bit and test out the technique and all that kind of stuff. That's not really what this project is about. But I wanted to talk more about some of the ideas that are in here, some of the ideas about health and healing and wellness that I encountered. And one of the things that really struck me was just this premise that how we talk about ourselves and how we think about ourselves really does have power, not just in terms of our mindset or how we're feeling for that day, but that it actually has energetic ramifications, that it can cause issues with our health and our wholeness, and that being positive can have really good effects on our bodies and help us be well, but that being negative is really something that affects our health. And I think for someone like me who tends to have very negative self-perceptions and really battles with those on a regular basis, that's a scary sort of notion. It's a scary idea to think that every time you think one of those negative thoughts, you're not only breaking down those internal walls mentally or emotionally, but you might actually be attacking your health, and that this could manifest in your physical body, that this could throw off your whole energetic system. And that's not a new concept. It's not something that I wasn't entirely aware of, but it's something that I had been kind of avoiding because I know that I tend to have a very negative self-perception. And there's a quote from the book that I really liked, thinking about negativity and how it fits into your life and how all of these sort of negative patterns continue to be in our lives. And it just says, if it will deplete, delete. And it's so hard to do that. It's so hard to unplug from that negative self-perception and the way you think about yourself and the way you talk about yourself. It can be very difficult to make those changes and to really focus on being more positive when you have this dark cloud that's sort of hanging over you. I think that sort of advice is very difficult for people who are struggling with depression, because it's not just somebody who's being down on themselves for a day or something bad happens and they focus on the negative part of the experience, but people who really have, whether it's a chemical imbalance or an energetic imbalance, and really have a hard time breaking out of that sort of negative thought pattern, it can be very difficult to figure out how to follow that advice of, if it's going to deplete you, delete it. And so I went into this very excited to try out some of these different energetic techniques. They have like thymus tapping and different kinds of grounding exercises. But I was a little bit nervous because I thought, what if I can't shake that sort of negative self-perception? What if that's something that I can't really step outside of? Is that going to sabotage any of the progress that I'm making with these techniques and with this program? And that's the really insidious part of depression, is that even things that are meant to work for you, your own brain and your own body sort of turns against you and convinces you that it can't be done. And so sometimes you just have to let go and just find a way to trust the process. And if you need help, don't be afraid to ask for it. Or even, according to this book, beg for it. Part 4. Graceful Begging. Now, even before I started working with any of the energetic techniques and the tapping and clearing and things like that, there was a section where she talks about what she calls graceful begging. And graceful begging is basically her way of conceptualizing prayer. Here's a quote from the book. While I didn't grow up praying and even rebelled against the idea, sometimes during my deepest, darkest days, I just begged. I called out in the dark and I begged for help from no one in particular. Over and over, when I reached places of despair, I'd beg. Not gracefully at the time, but from a place of total rawness, with a mixture of tears and snot dripping down my face. When I had sunken into places I believed I couldn't pull myself from, I'd reach for this and it would bring me the reprieve I so desperately needed. And I think that that's something that in some ways, whatever your religion or spirituality or personal spiritual practices, faith practices, whatever you want to call them, and whatever they are and however you define them, I think that everybody has a certain sense at which we sometimes just reach out into the world, into the universe, and we just say, I can't handle this. I need help. I need assistance. You know, there are really wonderful traditions around ritual and around prayer from every different society, and they thought about it differently and they practiced it differently, but it was all that same sort of universal thing. And I have some issues with organized religion. I haven't really talked about that too much in these episodes, and I certainly don't have time to unpack it now. This is kind of a spoiler alert for when we get to the first book that's got kind of a Christian perspective. I'm going to talk more about my experiences with organized religion and my feelings about it. But I love that in this book, she's very aware of that. And she actually takes it outside of any particular tradition and brings it back to what the purpose is. Here's another quote from the book. My original practice of screaming out and crying is now the technique of graceful begging, which has a resemblance to prayer, but is free from any negative religious associations. In fact, at some point, I discovered that the word prayer comes from the Latin precarious, which means obtained by begging. It makes this practice available to and relatable for everyone. And I love that because so many of us, and especially so many of us queer folk, have very troubled histories with the religious or spiritual traditions that we grew up with. There's so much tension there. And so having this practice that accomplishes that need or that desire to reach out to something universal, but doesn't have to be tied up and doesn't have to be connected and weighed down by those negative associations is so important. And I think that whatever your tradition or lack of tradition or rejection of tradition, I think that the idea of graceful begging, of some sort of prayer, is very useful. And it's really about connecting. It's about saying, I can't do this within myself alone anymore. I have to reach out for something. And it's not just about calling up a friend, although that is so important, having that support system and having that emotional support system, but just reaching out into the universe and saying, you know, I could use a break here. I mentioned earlier that I've been reading tarot cards for over 2 decades. And as I've studied the tarot and as I've started to work with clients and have really tried to build my tarot practice and build it into not only something where I'm able to actively help others, but also as part of my own spiritual tradition, there's something about the tarot that feels like the way some people describe prayer. You know, you're reaching out and you're trying to get messages or you're trying to get information that's going to help you navigate your life. And that's what prayer is all about. And that's what the tarot is all about. It's about saying, I need some help. I need some assistance. And so you draw some cards and you talk about the meanings and you look at what they're telling you and what messages are you getting. How is that any different from somebody who closes their eyes and kneels next to their bed and just puts words out into the universe? It's just trying to get messages. It's trying to get some sort of support from something bigger than you. A final quote from this section. She says, "It's all in the surrendering. It's the throwing of it from your hands and your heart and soul and simply moving beyond that heaviness of, I have to fix this in this moment. It's the energy of handing it over to a force greater than yourself." And honestly, I think that's where the truth lies. I think that's where the universal experience actually unites us rather than dividing us or separating us the way that organized religion can. I think that in the moment, we just put out that call to whatever is universal. And I really don't think we're naming it or thinking of it as something. We're just putting it out there. And then later we look back and, whatever your tradition is, you call it, praying to God or to Jesus or to Allah or to whoever it is that you're praying to, or you call it meditation, or you call it journeying, or you call it whatever you call it. But in the moment, I think that that's where we really connect with the universal. We just put something out there and say, please, whatever's out there, just help me, just give me something. And then we just come back and muck it all up later by putting names on it and dividing people up based on how they describe it or how they label it. And that's where I think we're really missing the chance to connect not only with the divine, but with each other. Because what's universal and what matters and what's true is the lightning. It doesn't matter if we call it, the sword of Zeus, or we call it God's flashbulbs or whatever it is. The truth is that lightning, and that exists, and that's real. And we can call it different things, but the important thing is to look for it. Part 5. You blockhead. A lot of what this book covers is clearing out energy blockages, finding memories or experiences that are negative that have sort of lodged themselves in your energetic system, and being able to clear them out and provide healing for your body so that they don't manifest in physical or emotional symptoms. And this is where my practical brain sort of goes into battle with my woo-woo side. And every time I read blockages, I can't help but think about those Charlie Brown cartoons where Lucy always calls him a blockhead and she kind of blames him for all of his own troubles. And that's a little bit how I feel while I'm working through this. I really want to just give in and I want to surrender to the process, but there's that voice inside my head that's like, this is weird. I don't know about this. Are you sure that tapping your thymus is going to do anything? And you have to kind of check your body and listen to your body. And that's not something that I'm always very comfortable with. I have a very complicated relationship to my physical body. It's something that I wrote about in a blog post on my website called Swimming, where I was trying to capture the idea of just loving your body the way that it is, using the metaphor of being in water. If you think about when you go into a pool or you go into a lake or some other body of water, the scientific term is displacement. So when you enter the water, you displace exactly the amount of space in the water that you are now taking up. That's why if you put your hand into a full bowl of water, it'll overflow. You're displacing the water with some new material. But it just felt like such a great metaphor for this idea of giving yourself the exact amount of space that you need for your own body. So not saying I'm going to love myself when I'm 20 pounds thinner, or I'm going to love myself if this wrinkle cream kicks in and I don't have crow's feet, or I'm going to love myself once I get a spray tan and I'm not so pale. We always put these conditions on loving ourselves and loving our physical bodies especially. And I thought maybe we have to start going the other way. Maybe we have to decide to just love our body where we're at right now. We have to say my body is worthy of love and worthy of respect and worthy of being treated like an actual human being's body without having to place any sort of condition on it, without having to place any sort of qualifier. If you do this, if you achieve this, if you lose this, then you can love your body. No, you can love your body now. But that's really fucking hard. It's a wonderful thing to write a blog post about. And it's a wonderful thing to talk about, but it's really hard to do. It's really hard to break down all of those walls that we have to sort of protect ourselves and all of those expectations and all of the negative messages that we get about our own bodies. And so having a program where so much of what you need to do to be successful is based in your physical body, God, that's difficult. It's so hard to say, I'm going to listen to what my body's telling me. Throughout every exercise in the book is you do this thing that she calls a body test, where basically you establish a sort of pattern for your body and you ask it questions. It's like using a pendulum, but it's using your body as the pendulum. It's a process called muscle testing. And here's something she says in the book about it. She says, if you ask questions when your body is in a relaxed but standing position, but still able to move without obstruction, you will involuntarily sway, either slightly backward or slightly forward, which will help you decipher if your body agrees with something you say or rejects it. Remember, words are really just energy. And so you balance yourself. There's a couple of techniques you do, the thymus tap and eye tracing exercises from a previous chapter, and you get yourself balanced and you get yourself to a good sort of centered place, and then you do this muscle testing. And so if your body is in agreement with the things that you say, you're supposed to sway slightly forward. If it disagrees or rejects the things that you're saying, you're supposed to sway slightly backward. And so all of the things that you do in this book, all of the additional exercises really rely on this muscle testing for you to determine, is this the right course of action? And so throughout the whole thing, what I'm struck with is that you really have to listen and trust your body. And that's difficult. That's something that is not natural to me. I think that I've really been working on trying to have more love and compassion for my body and my physical self. But that idea of trust is something new and it's something different. The more I started working through the techniques in this book and really focusing on my body's responses and how I was feeling, I started to think more about that logic part of my brain that was always rebelling against these kinds of things, against the more woo-woo parts of my life. And I really started to wonder if it was actually logical at all. Was it really some sense of a balanced, logical view of the world? Or was that voice based in something else entirely? Part 6, Living on Fear Street. When I was a kid, I loved the Fear Street books by R.L. Stine. Every time we went to Minot, I was always going into Walden Books and B. Dalton and checking the shelves to see if there was a new one. And I loved that these people lived in this world where there was all of this creepy stuff. And those books kind of went all over the place. Sometimes there was an actual sort of supernatural explanation to everything. And sometimes it was just some creepy guy down the street and it was much more realistic. But at that time, there was something exciting. There was something interesting about living in a place where your world was always soaked with fear. There was that electric tingle. Fear was something to be enjoyed, to be celebrated. Oh, poor, sweet, young, naive little me. Little did I know there was so much more to be afraid of in the world than creepy neighbors or a ghost in the basement. Comedian Kathleen Madigan has a great bit about teenagers and horror movies and the things that you should really be scared of in life.
I'm not afraid of normal things. It amazes me when my friend is a DVD distributor and he's like, you know what, people love horror movies because teenagers, they love to pay to be frightened. I go, that's because they have not lived long enough to know that real life will scare the shit out of you. There is no reason to go pay to be scared. Because at this age, I could care less if a vampire walked in my house. I truly wouldn't even blink an eye. But look at this mole. Yeah, that scares me. Look at that mole. Yeah. It's got ridges on it now. It didn't 3 weeks ago. But I don't have time to go to a doctor, so I just ask other comedians. They're like, hey, does that look fucked up to you? And they go, no. I go, cool. And then I go have another beer and forget about it. Yeah, Really? You're going to pay to be scared? I'll scare you. Here's a letter from the IRS. Do you want to open that now or after you've eaten lunch and you can vomit your $8 lunch special? I'm not afraid of a burglar. I'm afraid of the mailman. That's who I'm afraid of. That son of a bitch hasn't brought anything good to my house since I was 10.
I really do enjoy that segment. I think that it says a lot about how we think about fear and how we sometimes use manufactured fear to cover over the real things that make us scared, that make us afraid. And a big chunk of this book is talking about fear and is talking about how to overcome fear and how fear is what holds you back, and fear is what causes a lot of these physical and emotional manifestations of illness. I mean, obviously, yes, there are still people who break an arm or they catch a germ or there are actual illnesses. It's not saying that there aren't actual physical maladies and that people don't just suffer from them sometimes because they suffer from them, but that so much of what we think of as being something else is actually rooted in our emotional and spiritual lives and rooted in our experience of fear. There was actually a section of the book where I started to question some of my own contributions to the online world and the content that I create. She has a section talking about victim mentality, and there's a quote from the book that says, "Of course, it's healthy to share experiences, but there is a fine line between sharing and putting yourself in a place of powerlessness." Now, a lot of what I do is write about my experiences. I've written about, my experiences of depression, my experience going through my divorce, and now I'm talking about mental illness and depression again by doing this podcast, and it really made me question, am I doing this as a way to fight back against the fear, or am I living in the fear because the fear and the depression and the sadness is familiar and it's comfortable? There's another quote where she says, "While perhaps all of the experiences that led me to this victim mentality and behavior were valid, my feeding of that energy by constantly engaging others in it, talking about it, and researching it was certainly not hurting the tick or the insurance companies. I was the one who was being hurt by myself." And it's really easy for those of us who do creative work and who are performers or artists or writers or whatever we're doing to contribute to second guess and to feel like what we're doing is selfish. I've had to do a lot of work around that because I spend so much time and attention and effort on things like the world of champagne, on my podcasts, on other things that I do creatively that don't pay the bills. We're always so obsessed with what pays the bills and what actually contributes to society in some sort of capitalist money-making sort of way. And these other projects that I have, they don't. That's not what they're for. They're not here to make money. They're here to allow me creative expression and what I thought was to hopefully make a difference in the world. And I had to really think about it as I was going through this section. Was I dwelling on them? Was I allowing it to become something that defined me? She has a section where she's talking about transforming your unhealthy emotional patterns. And one of the things she talks about is the language that we use. And she talks about possessive language. So my insert name of challenge. And a quote from the book from this section says, "While possessives are necessary in the English language, it's wise not to claim anything that you don't actually want to be yours, like emotions, diseases, or other challenges. Examples of this include my cancer, my anxiety, my anger issues, and so on. These can all be rephrased with language that is relaxing to the body instead of stressful." And that was a huge moment for me when I read that, because I thought I talk about, my depression, or I talk about mental illness as something that is mine, something that's part of me all the time. There's another section where she says, "I am," and inserting an emotion. And, she says there's a fine line between feeling something and being something. Instead of saying, "I am sad," or "I am sick," say, "I feel sad," or "I feel sick." And that's something that I've really noticed about myself a lot lately, is that one thing that I keep saying to myself over and over again is that I'm sad all the time. I keep saying to myself, I am sad all the time. And I thought I was doing it in a way to try to release it and try to understand it and try to, grasp the boundaries of it or something. But I find myself just repeating that almost like a mantra. I am sad all the time. And what I'm doing is I'm programming that for myself. And that's really disheartening. It's really discouraging to think that I am something and not that I'm feeling something. And it just really made me think about what I refer to as my logical brain, that brain that resists all the woo-woo stuff. And I thought, what if that's not actually my logic? What if so much of the stuff in my brain that's telling me I am sad all the time, or tells me how I'm feeling and tells me that I don't have a right to trust my own body or love my own body, what if that's not logic? What if that's just the negativity that I've built on myself over and over again? And it's really frightening to think that I can no longer tell the difference, that I can't see that as just being negative self-talk and not logic, not something that is true. I mean, I feel like maybe I took that adolescent desire to live on Fear Street a little bit too literally, and I feel like I live in this place of fear all the time, and I don't know how to break out of it. And that's what I'm hoping that this book is really going to give me. I hope that it gives me some ways to start clearing out some of this negative energy. Part 7, The Practical Queer's Guide to Wellness. This book isn't a quick fix for anything. And I think that I knew that going into it, and I think that I probably knew deep down that there really isn't a quick fix to emotional hurt and trauma. But what I like about this book more than the other books that I've tried so far in this project is that with this book, I feel like I have things to do. I feel like I have actual practical solutions that I can try, activities that I can take part in that are going to hopefully contribute to a better well-being and to getting my energetic world in order. You know, I think that so much of what I am skeptical of and that I criticize in self-help culture is that it's just this sort of mental exercise. Believe in yourself. You can do it. You can change your life, but there's no real practical strategies for how to do that. And so I appreciate the books that provide some of those things. And in this, it's not even like an exercise to do to change your thinking. It's an actual physical work with the energies of your body to get yourself into a place where you can heal and where you can find wholeness. It's much more useful. It's much more usable. And it really gets to the heart of what's causing so many of my problems. That negative self-image and that negative self-talk. You know, I've built up this wall and this perception to the outside world that I'm strong, that I'm this warrior. And I think that it's difficult for me to show anything but that. And that's why this podcast series has really been a challenge for me, because I'm having to be vulnerable in ways that I haven't always been vulnerable before. And there's still some distance. It's kind of like my website. You know, I post blogs on my website about sensitive issues or about things that I'm struggling with. And I post these podcasts because there's a safety to it. There's a distance. I create this product and then I shoot it off out into the world. And it's not the same as having to sit face to face with people. And another thing that I love about this book is that you can clear negativity without having to re-engage some of the people that hurt you, because that's something that's truly wonderful. Because there are some people that have caused me trauma or that have been the source of some of my pain. And the thought of confronting them or finding closure or whatever the self-helpy sort of language is around that, some of it I don't want to do. Some of it I just don't want those people in my life anymore in any way. And so what I love about this is working with energies. You don't have to do that. You don't need to have the person in your life. You don't need to have some big scene. You don't need to have some final goodbye or tell off or whatever it is. You can just clear the energy and let it go. You just have to trust that it's possible. There's one final quote from the book that I want to share with you, which is from the section about addressing the real F word, fear. Learn and embrace in the deepest core of your being that you can handle anything that comes your way. You can survive. You can survive. You can survive. You can let go of the oars and be okay. And that's such a wonderful message. And I feel like for the first time, it's a message that has some tools and has some actual strategies to make that work. It's not just a lot of talk. It's not just a sort of feel-good mantra that they put into a book and throw it into the world so they can get your $18 or whatever. It's actually something that comes with this strategy for putting it into place. And it finally makes me feel good about being a survivor, because sometimes I think, way back in the very first episode, I talked about how I'm exhausted from surviving and I want to thrive again. And so usually when I see anything that says, you can survive, it just feels really empty, because I thought, well, yeah, I can survive, but am I living? Is that what living is about? And with this book, when she says you can survive, it feels like something that is achievable. And it feels like something that's not just continuing to breathe and your heart continuing to beat so that you're just alive, but there's no life and joyfulness behind it. And I've got a lot of work to do. And this is one of those books that I'm going to have to keep working with. I can't really give you a report and say, yep, I did the book, everything's fine. Series canceled. That's not what it is. It's something that's going to take a long time. And maybe I'll have updates throughout the series as I continue to work with it. But it's something that gives me a toolbox. It gives me something to do. And I'm so grateful for that. And just as a little aside, another thing that I enjoyed, I noticed that in the author description on the back of the book, it said that Amy was named one of Advocate's 40 under 40 for 2013. And the first acknowledgement is to her wife, Charlotte. I'm so glad that this book and these lessons are coming from somebody within my community, another queer person. So often queer folks were left out of religious and spiritual spaces. And so to know that she is having success in this arena and is offering this program to all different kinds of people, it really does make me feel good. It's nice to know that I can lose some of my negativity and lose some of these challenges and blockages without having to lose my queer identity. Part 8. The Good Kind of Fear. I may be rethinking my relationship with fear, but that doesn't mean that I don't still love horror movies. And I love weird, wild, quirky, crazy, independent horror. And there's nobody I can think of that epitomizes that more than the person who did the intro quote for this episode, Heidi Moore. Heidi Moore's Wretched Productions gave us the absolutely fantastic horror gem Dolly Deadly. If you haven't seen that film, it is a real mind bender. It's so good. It's got this quality like the typical 80s sort of slasher film, but it's got all of this really amazing, dreamlike imagery, really fun special effects. It's just a really cool film. The sequel, Kill Dolly Kill, Dolly Deadly 2, is coming soon from Wretched Productions and in association with Troma Pictures, home of The Toxic Avenger. But Heidi Moore isn't just someone who makes independent cinema, she's also somebody who champions it. She champions the creators who are working outside of the studio system, and she really does believe that budget does not indicate quality, and that there's really great, fantastic, undiscovered independent gems out there. And that's why she started the streaming service True Indie. True Indie is a wonderful option for people who want something outside of the typical Hollywood mainstream features. It's only $4.95 a month. It's available through trueindie.tv, and there's also an app available through the Google Play Store. Just look for True Indie, that's TrueIndie.tv, or search for True Indie in the Google Play Store and you'll find the app. And go and check out some of the really amazing independent features and shorts that she's collected in all kinds of genres. I've watched so many interesting, weird, wild things on that app, and it really is an amazing service for people who love independent film and also for the people who make independent film. Heidi Moore was also the guest on Season 2, Episode 1 of Janessa After Dark. So if you want to know more about her, you can listen to that episode and get to know a little bit more about this fabulous Scream Queen, who's also an amazing person and someone I'm glad to call a friend.
Miss Jaye, The Renovation is a 17-episode limited series podcast presented by Champagne Dreams Productions. While we're all here to have fun, mental health is a serious issue. Nothing in this podcast series should be taken as medical advice, and listening to podcasts or reading self-help books is not a substitute for proper mental health care. If you or someone you know is considering suicide, please contact the Suicide Prevention Hotline at 1-800-273-8255 or visit suicidepreventionhotline.org for more information. I love all of my champagne dreamers out there. Stay safe and stay alive.
The clip from Kathleen Madigan's comedy special, Madigan Again, is used under the fair use provision of the Copyright Act pertaining to comedy, commentary, and education. It is used for entertainment purposes and out of a sincere appreciation for Kathleen Madigan's comedy genius. Please don't sue me. I have a whole lot of good intentions, but no money. This episode of Miss Jaye, the Renovation also includes royalty-free music from bensound.com. The tracks featured in this episode, in the order in which they appeared, are Clear Day, Enigmatic, Piano Moment, A Day to Remember, November, and Summer. For these and more great royalty-free tracks, please visit bensound, that's BEN sound.com. Miss Jaye, the Renovation is written by Chris M. Stoner and is a Champagne Dreams production.